Labertouche is predominantly a dairy region and a little settlement with no shops, a hall. We had 2 tennis courts, we had a school. The bus used to come past the hall, so all the kids up the road, up Forest Road and around the roads used to come here to be picked up to be taken to the secondary school. But I think Labertouche itself was predominantly dairy. I would say that this hall and the tennis club and the school, even though that's a kilometre and a bit up the road, were the centrepieces of a district. And so that everything revolved around the assets and how do we do the maintenance. So we had working bees and those sorts of things which people readily came to, because you could have a talk and a laugh and a giggle about things, and then you'd have a cup of tea and then you'd go home, but the work was done. And they were such important assets to have in these country districts. On the morning of 2009, the fires were, the wind and the amount of heat that was around made people become anxious about when was this thing going to come out of the forest, because we were waiting for it to come out of the state forest. And so the whole mornings, and everybody was doing the same thing. They were preparing themselves for when it might get there. And it didn't get there until 2 in the afternoon for us. And I remember we live on top of the hill, and I remember the helicopter flying around, and we were wetting down on the hour. But John said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about anything too much. Have a look down here, meaning across the flats of Labertouche, and it was all alight, whereas we hadn't had it. So I think people were anxious about what was going to happen. I think people were anxious about how they were going to feel about having to, they've decided to stay and defend. But how was that going to go? So that was an unknown. And what was going to burn, that was an unknown. And I think that before it actually broke, the fire trucks came around and asked, were you staying and defending? And we said yes. And then after that, there was nothing. So there was, when you said yes, you were by your lonesome. And they went to the school and stayed there. They came down to the hall here and stayed here until the fire had passed. So again, it was a very anxious moment, really, really anxious, because wasn't fear, it was just that you didn't know what to expect.
So I'm actually a firefighter myself in Merrinell Fire Brigade, and we had the fires come through and actually had a sports day that day. We were supposed to be swimming, and the fires came through here, and I was actually on fire truck. Lots of the children and families were anxious because we'd previously had the Black Saturday fires come through Labertouche as well. So it was a little bit daunting in terms of what was going to happen. We had to close the school because it was so close to the school. Some of the families kept the children home, and towards the end of the week we actually took the children down to Longwarry and we opened up there and we had the children there so we can continue classes, so it was normality for the children. The children at the moment are showing an interest, and we can only give them the tools for in the future to be able to help them. I believe that these children showing the interest at the moment, they're going to have a good understanding and good knowledge of fire safety and what to do, and I believe that they are going to be able to teach their children how to be safe and to know the signs to look out for in terms of what to do and getting themselves ready and helping others around them.
There's a strong sense in Labertouche of volunteering, and there's an expectation when you're in really small communities that unless we all kick in together, we can't achieve the goals that we need to. And in fact, sometimes it's just not safe unless we're all helping each other. And I think that becomes the world that the kids know, and that creates really good little citizens who are able to help each other and work together and know that that's what you need to do. There's less of a me, and more of an us when you're in this type of environment.
I think a lot of the times the blokes would congregate down here to pick up stuff, and so then the chatter went on. If people needed a hand with fence posting or wiring or any of that sort of stuff, then people would just put up their hand and volunteer. There was a board in the shed that people could write on it and say they're available, that sort of stuff. But I think the other side of it too, women were cooking, so there was lots of that going on, and supply of those cooked meals, coming together for cooked meals down here at the hall. They're the sorts of things, and that was a regular occurrence, and I think that was a good thing for people because they still needed to talk about it. And then they delivered a picture book with the pictures that people had taken, but the community itself got together to make sure that we worked as teams to be able to be resilient in a way that some of them still have mental health issues around this stuff, and so the memory's still raw, and you have to remind yourself that you made it through and that you did a good job. But for some people who didn't have the confidence and then found it difficult, you still have to reassure them that they did a good job. But mental health issues are still being felt by some of them.
So the community actually rallied together, and they all came together, whether it be after school. A lot of the families would stay here after school and just talk to each other about their feelings, let the kids have a play, what was happening next, did they know any information, how were their properties, was any of them threatened, was any of them burnt. They then talked about other family members that may have been closer. They then came together in terms of, were their families in need? Did they need some additional support? Did they need the kids being picked up? Did they need to help with their properties in terms of fencing? Were the fires out on their property? What was happening? What support could they give? And just connecting with each other so that they knew who was in trouble or needed help and who was fine and could support. May have been also their animals, their property, and so various families took on other people's animals and put them on their properties just to look after them until we got clarification that it was safe around the area.
Our school uses the hall for our concerts and for any grand big events. We struggle for parking at our little school, so the hall is fantastic for us to use for things where we know we're going to have large numbers attending. We go down there for badminton. I don't know, I'm sure someone has told you Labertouche is famous for badminton. So we go down there and we do our badminton in the Labertouche hall, and we try to work in as much as we can, because really the school and the hall, they're the key elements of the Labertouche community.
How we learned to dance was we had functions down at the hall once a month where we'd have a night of dancing and music and supper, and there was never any alcohol involved in all of that. It was just come and enjoy yourself and catch up with people, because they lead busy lives on farms as well.
The people out here are strong and they are tough. They work together to create what they need. So if we ever need anything out at this school, within moments we have it.
It's hard to get people to actually understand the magnitude of what that fire was. And I think that people think far too often, it's not going to happen to me.
I think we're able to create resiliency in the kids out here because there are lots of things that we can't necessarily protect them from, or there are things that happen when you are out in the bush or out in rural communities that creates resiliency in kids, because things happen like the water tank runs out of water, or there's other things that need to happen, so that their coping skills are developed through the experiences that they've had.
There's an element about rural living that keeps you grounded. When you live in a rural district like Labertouche, the ability to be able to find solutions to problems are the biggest assets for people. the generosity of people to be able to give is what you see in disasters. We need to stay focused on keeping our thoughts and our practices together so that we can, Labertouche could have a distinct plan around what happens in the next bushfire.